Hey guys, Scott here, and welcome to my Ultimate Blight guide. I'm going to try to give as generic a guide as possible. I don't really want to talk about like the perks or the add-ons as much as I want to talk about how to actually use his power, because his power is probably going to stay the same, but builds change, perks change, things like that. So I want to go as generic as possible. That being said, I will go over a few builds that I think are very good on Blight. And we'll start with, the generic one. I think I want to explain why the whole Rune Undying Tinker thing is a thing. I want to explain why people have chosen that, so you can take the reasons behind that and make your own build that might be just as good, better, or worse, or just simply different for the sake of being different. So the reason why people are using Hex Rune on Blight is because Hex Rune inherently benefits killers that have insane mobility, and Blight has ridiculous mobility. So as soon as the survivor gets off a generator, if your rune is up, the generator starts regressing. And Blight is a god at getting anywhere on the map and getting people off generators, so he is probably one of the best killers in the game to benefit from rune. So rune is just a given in terms of game delay. That's the number one perk for him in terms of game delay. That's a no-brainer. And then, of course, Undying makes it so your runes simply last longer. So again, it's a no-brainer. It also gives you vision of when they're near a totem, so you can actually go and prevent them from breaking it. It's too good of a combo on Blight. It's hard to not recommend it. Tinker also sort of goes with that as well, because it lets you know when and where to get people off generators if you're not actively chasing somebody at the time. Or even if you are, you can literally ditch the chase and just get people off. So all these perks greatly reward Blight's mobility, and Rune synergizes with getting people off generators, which Blight is nearly the best killer in the game for. So that explains why that build is a thing, because that, of course, is insanely strong. But let's look at the actual reasons behind that. So I just talked about, how the perks synergize, but there are other perks that sort of have a similar style as well. So, for example, if you don't want to use Hex Undying, you can use Thrill of the Hunt. It's not as good as Undying, but Undying is probably going to get nerfed, let's be honest, and I want this guy to be timeless. So any perk that can sort of help you hang on to your rune a bit longer, Thrill the Hunt can work just fine. It'll actually give you the notification as well, so you can still actually protect your totem, because keeping rune up is pretty damn important on this killer because of how good rune is. So Thrill the Hunt is fine, but the thing that makes Blight and other high mobility killers unique is that basically the more mobility that you have, the stronger that information perks become in terms of delaying the game. For example, like a Huntress with Discordance, yeah, it'll tell you that there's people across the map on Mother's Dwelling, but you can't stop them from doing anything. So there's no actual inherent game delay to that. However, with Blight, if you see the same thing, you can actually get them off the generators, and downing survivors is the best game delay in the entire game. So information perks actually can become more useful for Blight. So that's when you have things like Surveillance or Discordance, Thrilling Tremors, things like that. Information perks actually become better for Blight, because you can actually act upon the information that you have almost immediately. So those perks can have great value. Pop Goes Weasel is a staple, but it's just inherently weaker than Rune as long as Rune is up. The upside being, obviously, Pop cannot be dismantled in any way. It's a permanent perk, but it requires you to kick a generator, so it doesn't last quite as long. Infectious Fright, another example of a information perk that Blight can make great. You set up down somebody, someone screams, you can be on their ass in not even 5 seconds. You can be on their ass immediately. And that is more pressure, because now this guy slugged, you're chasing another guy, that's 2 people off gens immediately. And probably a third, because someone has to go pick up the slug guy and all that good stuff. Those are probably the main perks I would recommend on him. There are a couple of other things I've seen people use, like Save the Best for Last, which I find to be kind of useful, but a lot of the times you're not in a situation where you can actually hit somebody with your power. And then I think Save the Best for Last is only good on killers that can actually save their stacks, like Demogorgon. Demogorgon's great with it, but Blight can't really save his stacks whenever he wants. A lot of the time he can, but it's not a guarantee, so I can't super recommend it. But other than that, there are a couple of other perks, but I think the ones I've listed are the ones that are the most effective on him overall, because you want to reward his mobility. That's the most important part. All right, so now let's actually go over the important part of the guide, which is how to use Blight's power properly. There are a lot of very unique things about his power that make it very hard to learn. I'd say he's probably the hardest killer in the game in terms of actually learning to master his power. Like Nurse might be harder to get into, but I think the skill cap for Blight is actually slightly higher, because there are just so many things you have to learn. So this is definitely a killer you can put a bunch of time into and still not fully understand how to use his power correctly, but I'll try to go over it as best I can. So his power is basically a rushing attack. His rushing attack can also bounce into objects, which allows him to extend his attack even further. This is why people call him the pinball, because he basically just pinballs around by bouncing into stuff. And he has a lot of very unique things about his bounce and his swing that I want to get into. So first, when you use his power, you start a rush. You rush for about 3 seconds in one direction. You can turn a little bit and you can strafe a little bit. And this movement does add up over the course of the 3 seconds, so it's not nothing, even though it seems very small. So keep that in mind. So for the first rush, you consume one of your 5 tokens and you go in that direction. And as soon as you hit an object, the next and all other rushes you do in this chain have a lethal property to it, where basically your knife is raised and you can actually swing during these lunges, and that's how you actually hit people with your power. So you must bounce at least once before you can use it in an offensive manner. So, like I said, you have 5 tokens. The first use is just the basic lunge, so you have 4, and your first bounce will put you at 3. So basically, to get into the offensive mode, you'll have 3 bounces left, and that is what you have to use to actually hit people. So the Lethal Rush has a lot of interesting things about it. For one, it does not behave like a normal lunge. It has a shorter hitbox, so hitting people through windows is not as forgiving, and you actually can't hit people like that far away. It also has very limited movement, so a normal killer can lunge and rotate 360 degrees wherever they want. That's why it's very hard to spin a killer that's just using a basic attack, because they have full range of movement. However, this ability is a very, very small range of movement, so it's actually fairly easy to spin it if you don't know what you're looking for. So that can be a detriment, and it's something you have to learn to actually use properly. The other weird thing about it is it has no collision, which means it cannot collide with walls. The only thing the Lethal Rush can actually hit is a survivor. That's the only thing that'll stop it. So you can use this actually to your benefit by swinging into a wall at an angle, and you'll actually glide along the wall. Whereas with a normal killer, you would hit the wall and it would cancel your attack. With Blight, if you're in a Lethal Rush, you can actually hit the wall, glide along the wall, and end the lunge on the other side of that wall, basically. If you're talking about, like, a 90-degree turn. So there's a lot of interesting things you can do with that as well. It's a weird property. It's the only attack in the game, I think, that has specific hitboxes for only survivors, but that's something you have to keep in mind as well. Another very important thing to know about Lethal Rush is the cone of its hitbox is huge. And I think this is to counteract the fact that you can't really turn it very much once you actually begin the lunge part. So basically, a normal killer's lunge is, you have like a cone like this, right? And then you would be, like, you would swing right here, and then the killer's lunge will basically hit anywhere in that. Blight's is like this. It's like a full 180 degrees. So what that basically means is you can swing at something, and you can have a survivor, like, to your left, and you can have a survivor to your right, barely even on the screen, and you'll still hit them, whereas with any other killer, it would miss. So you can't turn it very much, but it has a very forgiving and huge hitbox on the sides. Not in the front, but on the sides. So when you think about how his actual thing looks like, it's more of a rectangle, not a box, and it's a rectangle that goes width side and not, depth side. So that'll give you a good example of how his hitbox actually connects with things. All right, so now for actually when to use this power. Because the thing is, the most common thing that inexperienced Blights do is they use his power too much. And for some reason, people use this as an argument as to why he's not, like, super strong, which doesn't make any sense to me. Like, there are some loops in the game that he cannot use his power at. But that's true for most killers. Like, Hillbilly can't use his... You don't rev a chainsaw at every single pallet. You don't ready a hatchet at every single pallet. Like, that's just not how the game works. So there are some loops that you cannot use his power in, and I think the most important thing about learning to use his power is learning when to just not use his power. Because you'll end up wasting a bunch of time for no reason when you could have dealt with a loop in a couple of seconds. And Blight is unique in that he is able to catch back up after dealing with a loop almost faster than any other killer in the game. Actually, he probably is the fastest, other than maybe Nurse, who can just blink directly on top of it. Maybe Spirit with some good add-ons, but Blight is extremely good at catching back up. But first, let's go over what stuff you should not actually use your power in. And that is short loops like this one. So this is like a common junk loop. This is on a lot of maps. I would say this is on most maps in the game in some variety. It's on Colwyn, it's on Autohaven, it's on Macmillan, it's on most maps. So this is, there's no real title for these types of loops. It's just basically a short junk loop. It's just a pallet with a short side, a slightly longer side, and it's not that big. they're usually rounded. Rounded is a big weakness of Blight. There needs to be like, cut corners for him to go. If it's rounded, he can't do much there. So it might seem detrimental to say, well, Blight can't do anything. Because if you try using your power at a tile like this, basically what happens is you end up just slamming into shit. You can't really do much, and that's okay. Like you might say, yeah, you maybe could bounce off this tree, but because this is round, she's going to be on the other side before I even get there. So it's just not worth even using your power at these types of loops. But the thing is, if you actually look at a loop like this, although you can't use your power in it, if you actually time how long you're in here, it ends up taking probably 10 seconds of your time, if that. You get like 1, maybe 2 loops, and then the pallet's just gone. And that's not a big deal. So I'd say one of the most important things to learn about Blight right off the bat is that you cannot always use your power, and that's okay. On the loops that you can't use your power, run around it once or twice. It'll take 9-10 seconds. It's not a big deal. But then once you break the pallet, you can catch back up in literally 2 seconds, and then this is how you're going to get a lot of your hits. Because you can't actually hit people at those short loops, but you can catch back up after you break the pallet. So, number 1, most important tip, don't use your power at short, rounded loops. And it's hard to give an example because they're literally everywhere. I don't know how to give a better example than this one, but they are on basically every map in the game. So if it's a short loop with like rounded sides and things like that, just don't bother using your power, run around it normally, and then use your power once you break the pallet to catch back up and get your hit. That's how you're going to get your hit at those types of loops. Just deal with it and then use your power to actually get the hit. Now there are a couple of other examples of tiles that are common that you can't really use your power on. A good example is something like the cow tree. The cow tree is basically that short rounded loop. So it's both of those things that Blight can't really do anything about. If you try using your power, they can just go on the short side and then you can't really do anything. So don't really try using it at the cow tree. Also, there are LLT walls that you can try to use your power in, but I say for LLT walls, it's actually not worth it unless there's like a tree that'll give you a guaranteed hit. I'm not saying you can't do it. A lot of the times you can. But I find LLT walls so easy to play for killer that it's much better to just play it normally, save your charges, and then once you get the hit, then you actually use the power to down them. Now, if they're already injured at a T-wall, then I'd say it's okay. But for the most part, I would not use this power at a T-wall because it's just not really worth the risk of you screwing it up. Or there maybe is not a tree you can bounce off of, because usually you require some type of external thing that's not always guaranteed to spawn. So as a general blanket statement for a guide, short loops like these and TL walls, just don't bother. Just run around it once or twice, get rid of the pallet. But, I just wanted to give a couple more examples of things that fall under that category. But other than those type of loops, Blight can use his power at most generic tiles in the game, including long walls, short walls, shack, things like that. So, for example, this is exactly how you would play something like shack. So you'd be chasing a survivor around this side because this is the safer side to run shack. It gives them the fast fall to the window. If a survivor is running in the opposite direction, it's really not that strong anyway because they're forced to basically vault it from the side that you're already on, which means you're just going to get a hit even regardless of your power. So this is like worst case scenario. A survivor has the good angle for the window. So what you do as Blight is actually you round the corner tightly with them, and then you use your power as soon as you get around the corner. Now, when people were first learning Blight, they thought it would be better to bounce off the wall that's behind here and then go to the window, but that actually takes longer. It's better to just skim along the sides, just like the survivor does, and then you want to bounce into the door frame like this. Now, the thing is, this is where you use that slam feature for the 2-second window that you can chain bounces together by entering the building a bit during your slam. So you have a little bit of a time to walk in like this, and now I'm actually inside the shack, and from there, you can just immediately chain it into another hit. So Blight is absolutely destructive at shack. And if you just do this, bounce on the door frame, hit that, it covers most escape options. They won't make it to the pallet. If they go in the basement, well, then they're in the basement. You're going to get a hit regardless. There is one thing survivors can try to do to mitigate this, and that is if they try to go on this side. So what a survivor will try to do is go behind the lockers. Now, you play this the exact same way with one exception. So you're going to do it, power, in the door frame. Now, once you get to this point, you're still in your slam. This is exactly the same as the first time, but you would see the survivor right here if they're going towards the window. If you don't see a survivor here at this point, that means they're no longer going towards the window. There's nowhere else they could possibly be. So once you see this happening, then you immediately look to the right, use this wall to bounce off of, and this gives you an angle to get an attack this side. So that's a free hit that way. They can't go to the window. They can't go to the pallet. No matter what, you get a hit here. So this is the safe option if you see them not going immediately for the window, and that basically covers all your bases at check. The next very strong generic tile is a long wall jungle gym. It's notoriously one of the strongest structures that can spawn on basically any map in the game. Blight deals with it very, very well. So if you're running it the normal way, which would give the survivor the fast vault to the window, then you basically just run up to them, and you could actually bounce off something like this tree, but I'm trying to make the guide as universal as possible. So let's assume the tree's not there. You could round the corner with them and then immediately charge. You can actually hit this wall as well if you want to be a bit faster, but basically you would do this, and then you would hit this wall, and you scan for a bit, because if they're going through the window, they're going to be about here. If they're trying to loop it around this way, then they're going to be about on this side, or if they're trying to juke you by running into a corner. Basically, as soon as you get to this point, you use your slam to very quickly analyze where they are, and then you will chain that into a hit. So no matter what they do, you're going to be able to get a hit there, and that's how you run it on that side. Now, it is possible for them to run along the window side, which is going to be over here. So if they try to go along this window side, like they run along the side, well, that's also good for you because they're not really using the long wall jungle gym. They're just using a window at this point. So they'll be able to use that not for a very long time, because all you do is guess one window vault correctly, and then you're going to get a free hit even without your power. So basically, they run it the correct way and then they get hit, or they run it the incorrect way and it's very inefficient and they still end up probably getting hit anyway. So you can get rid of that pallet really, really fast. One thing I do want to share is an example. If you do have objects to bounce off of, then you should use them. So like, for example, right here, that tree that we talked about, this would make it even safer. This is one of the most important things you got to remember when you're playing Blight, is that you always have to be aware of what's around you. I'm trying to make the guide as universal as possible, and assuming that nothing else spawns, like just play the tile. But in reality, that's almost never the case. There's always a thing. There's always a hook or a barrel or a tree or just something to bounce off of, and you always have to be constantly scanning when you're in loops what you can use. That's what makes the skill cap so high in this killer. You have to always be analyzing what's around you. So, for example, this tree makes this actually a lot easier by bouncing off the tree. It gives me free entryway. And although I can't get a direct hit here, obviously I can still bounce off of this. So in the worst case scenario, she would just drop the pallet immediately, and then I would break the pallet with my actual attack, because when you lethal rush into a pallet, it also breaks. So that would have dealt with the long wall jungle gym in 2 seconds, which is significantly faster than most killers can deal with it. So that is also very strong as well. Now, a common thing that people will actually do is put a small object in the way, because if the object is small, they can run around it faster than you can bounce off of something and then bounce right back. So a lot of the time, what you have to do is sort of fake going one way and then swing the other. And typically, they'll just barely juke into what you're actually, faking. So here's an example of what I mean. So, for example, I use my charge. She knows I'm coming, and then she fakes like going to the left side. And so you have to do like kind of like a bit of an assumption here. So, but you can also kind of control this bait too. So I start charging to the left side. I'm telegraphing that I'm going to the left side as much as humanly possible. And then right at the end before, because, I'm not worried about my lunge hitting the tree because it can't. So right before I get to, the actual tree, I switch it to the right. And because I started my charge on the left, she was juking the other direction into where I'm going. This is a common thing Onis do as well. You charge basically one side and then you very quickly switch to the other. And by that time, they're just rotating and they don't have enough time to like switch. So if they're trying to put small objects between you and them, doing this where you rush one direction and then you lunge the other is a good solution for small enough structures like that. So now I wanted to go over his actual hitbox on his lunge, because it is really weird and you wouldn't think you could hit some of the hits that you can actually do. And I want to give a clear visual example of what I'm talking about when I say he's got basically an 180-degree cone attack. So, for example, right here, I'm lunging early, because lunging early is actually a pretty good idea if you're predicting a spin, because a lot of the time you will not be able to spin enough to counteract it. So if you know a survivor is going to try to spin, you basically attack early, and then they'll spin into your already existing lunge. But even if you don't, here's an example. She actually pretty much successfully spins it. I'm swinging here, but it still hits her, because it's such a wide cone that it enables you to do that. And you can use this to your advantage. Basically, if you are touching a survivor and you press M1, you're going to hit them even if they spin. So that is something to keep in mind when you're getting close to a survivor. It's almost sometimes better to actually wait until you're touching them. So if your trajectory is lining up so that you are definitely going to collide with the survivor, immediately pressing M1 when you are touching their model is better than waiting for them to basically complete a spin, because even if they do spin, you'll still hit them. And we tested this a bunch of times, but the actual cone that you have on the attack is insane. So definitely keep that in mind. And I would say the best thing you can do if you are on a straight line trajectory to collide with the survivor is wait to swing until you are touching them, because you pretty much can't miss. Now, if your trajectory is not directly aligned with them, then you'll have to swing early, because you have to kind of predict which way they're going to try to spin. But here's like one more example of how ridiculous the, look at where I am right now. She is completely 90 degrees on my side, and this hits. So this is a perfect visual example of how ridiculously wide the hitbox is. And that's why if you wait until you're touching the person, even if you're not actually hitting them, as long as you're in their range, basically, it'll hit. So that is something you can keep in mind to not get spun while using his attack. If you're on a perfect collision course with the survivor, wait until you're touching their model. You can't really miss. However, if you're slightly off one way or the other, then you will have to lunge a bit earlier to predict which way they're going to spin. So next I want to go over a bunch of like miscellaneous things that there's not really any section for these. It's just random things you learn while playing Blight. This killer has so many little gimmicks to learn and so many like just little tips that it's really hard to categorize them into a certain section. So I'm just going to list off a bunch of random shit that's important to know. Instant hits like that one. Instant hits are basically when you complete a bounce and then you lunge in the same motion as you begin another bounce. You're basically on your mouse, you're going like you're hitting M2 and then M1 immediately after. This is something that you need to learn, because a lot of the time, if you're in a slam like this and you're touching the survivor, you need to be able to swing immediately. So you got to practice having quick fingers and M2, M1. You don't even see the lunge start. You don't even see the charge start. You just begin your lunge immediately. That's very important, because a lot of the time people will try to like dodge your slam and then they end up being right next to you, and you have to be able to attack almost immediately. It's very, very important. Another just generic tip I would want to give with Blight is canceling your power is okay. A lot of the time, I see a lot of people playing Blight, and they just keep using their power. Once they're in a charge, they're like, well, I gotta keep charging until I hit them. It's okay to get to a rock or a short loop where you can't use your power and just stop. That's for some reason like one of the hardest things a lot of Blights do is they always want to use their power, and they're like scared to stop it because they think they failed their power use. But really, it's not a big deal. So if you see a survivor get to like even like a big rock, not even a loop, just a big rock, just cancel your power. Yeah, they'll get a bit of distance on you, but that's okay. You're never going to hit them with your power on something like a very short rock or something like that. So just learn when to cancel your power. It's not that big of a deal. A lot of the times you're just using your power to get into a good position, not even to necessarily get somebody. So don't always look at it that you're always trying to use your power to hit them. A lot of the time you're just zoning people. A lot of the time you're just getting into a good area. Another important thing, as you might have just seen right there, is do not repeatedly use your power. All right, it's hard to explain this one. When you bounce into an object, even if you have a clear-cut path to something else, don't immediately right-click your mouse again, or don't, whatever the button is for console. Don't immediately use your power again, because if you are not, when you hit a wall, you recoil backwards a bit. If you try to chain together another bounce before you have fully recoiled backwards, it only takes like a half a second. But if you try to do it before you've done that, you'll basically just hit like a wall that doesn't even exist a lot of the time. So although it might be tempting to immediately, go into another bounce, a lot of the times it's not worth it, because it'll just hit air or something like that. So every time you hit a slam, you almost always want to wait at least like a half a second. Even if you got like split-second reaction times, it's still better to wait just a little bit. Because there is this weird collision with like invisible walls that you kind of want to try to avoid. Another just sort of generic tip is don't be afraid to abandon chases. Blight is one of the best killers at abandoning chases. That seems like such a strange thing to list as a positive, but a lot of the time you have to abandon a chase. They're in an area that's too strong, or they're not near a generator, so you're just pressuring nothing at that point. Blight is extremely good at just switching to multiple targets, and it's just, you don't even lose any time. So say you're in a chase with someone and they're in the middle of suffocation pit or something like that, and you think you're not going to be able to get an easy hit on them, and you see people, working on gens very far away, it is almost always better to just leave the chase and go for the easier hit. A lot of killers don't have that luxury. Like a huntress can't just decide, hey, I'm just going to go 50 meters away now and abandon this chase, because she might not actually get anything out of it, whereas Blight can get there before they can respond or get to a safer area. So Blight's whole strength is bouncing between multiple areas literally very fast. So he is great at catching people out of a safe area because he doesn't give them time to get to a safe area. It's not like the entire map is safe. As soon as you break a couple of pallets, you've made a basic dead zone for Blight, and then he can pretty much have his way with you. So don't be afraid to use your mobility. Don't be afraid to abandon chases, because downing survivors and, you know, putting people off generators is the best game delay that you can do, and Blight excels very, very well at that. Other than that, there are a couple of other just little tips, but they mostly involve perks and things like that, or they involve different play styles using add-ons. For example, if you're using Compound 21, you're going to be going for different type of attacks because you can see people through walls, and I'm trying to make the guide as neutral as possible to not, because I don't think you should always rely on add-ons like that to just always see like where people are. I think just learning him base kit is a lot better. And there are add-ons like the speed add-ons, which don't necessarily make you more limited in what you can do, but they make you have to have even faster reaction time because you have less time to, you know, you're going twice as fast, you have less time to react. So I would not recommend the speed add-ons until you've kind of mastered the killer, because it makes him actually harder to play, much like speed add-ons for Oni can sometimes actually be a detriment because you can't turn enough in that, because you're covering too much distance in a short amount of time, so you can't turn enough. Other than that, I think that's pretty much as good as I can do in terms of being a, you know, generic. It's super hard to make a guide for this killer because there are so many just random things that can spawn on the map, and this is the killer that has to bounce off of those random things. So I cannot give you really good visual examples of all the things that you can bounce off of, because I cannot possibly account for every random occurrence of a tree or a stick or something that you can bounce off of. So really hard to do something like this. And I hope the generic information I gave was enough. But as always, if you have any questions, leave a question in the comments and I'll try to answer it as much as possible to make up for the fact that I cannot possibly account for every randomly spawning bush. So other than that, thank you guys for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and I will see you next time. Take it easy, guys.